When we say a narcissistic woman seeks control rather than connection, we're not simply describing a personality flaw, we're describing an entire psychological framework. A narcissist does not enter relationships the way emotionally healthy individuals do. She does not scan for compatibility, mutual growth, or shared purpose. She scans for leverage. She looks for the emotional architecture she can inhabit and dominate. It is not the man she wants. It is the position he can be placed in. Control becomes the currency of the relationship, and your emotional stability becomes the collateral she is willing to spend. This dynamic begins subtly. At first, she mirrors what you desire, your ideals, your values, your goals, because imitation is the fastest route to influence. She studies you with clinical precision, not out of admiration, but out of strategy. The more she understands what you respond to, the deeper she can shape the narrative in her favor. This is not love. This is psychological mapping. She is charting the landscape of your vulnerabilities, identifying where the doors are unlocked, and deciding where she can enter without resistance. Once she senses you've invested emotionally, the shift begins. Control reveals itself not through loud declarations, but through gradual psychological pressure. You'll notice she becomes selectively affectionate, warm when she wants something, cold when you step outside the script she has created. This inconsistency is not a glitch, it is the method. The human psyche becomes most compliant when trapped in cycles of hope and disappointment. She creates the high so she can weaponize the low. You begin to feel that your emotional state is tied to her approval, and in that dependence, she finds power. A narcissistic woman does not fear losing you, she fears losing control over you. That is why your autonomy becomes the greatest threat in the relationship. The moment you begin questioning patterns, asserting boundaries, or reclaiming your identity, her behavior shifts from seductive to punitive. Criticism becomes sharper. Silence becomes colder. Accusations become more irrational. These reactions are not emotional outbursts. They are control mechanisms designed to push you back into psychological submission, understanding. This dynamic is not about villainizing her. It's about liberating yourself. You cannot change a structure built on control, but you can refuse to be governed by it. And once you see the pattern clearly, you are no longer inside it. You are above it. If there is one thing you must understand about a narcissistic woman, it is that her emotional ecosystem is built on an insatiable need for validation, not affection, not intimacy, not understanding, validation. It is the psychological oxygen she breathes, the substance that keeps her fragile inner world from collapsing. And when she enters a relationship, she is not looking for a partner, she is looking for a supplier. Your role in her mind is to provide a constant stream of affirmation that stabilizes the self-image she works tirelessly to maintain. Need for validation often disguises itself as confidence. She may appear self-assured, charismatic, even authoritative. But beneath that surface lies a shaky and unintegrated sense of self. Jung spoke often about the fractured psyche, and in many ways the narcissistic individual embodies that fragmentation. She constructs an external persona, attractive, accomplished, in control, because she cannot bear to confront the internal void. Your validation fills that void momentarily, but like any temporary fix, it quickly fades, and she demands more. You'll notice this pattern in the way she responds to your attention. When you praise her, she glows, not with gratitude, but with relief. When you fail to provide admiration, even unintentionally, she reacts with irritation or withdrawal, as if your silence is a personal attack. Your emotional energy becomes her barometer for self-worth. And because no human being can sustain constant validation, she inevitably becomes dissatisfied, restless, or accusatory. It's not that you failed her, it's that the task itself is impossible. This is why relationships with narcissistic women feel exhausting. You are not participating in mutual emotional exchange. You are participating in emotional labor. You begin to notice that your needs are never truly addressed, not because she doesn't care, but because she cannot afford to. Her entire psychological survival depends on maintaining a steady flow of admiration, and anything that threatens that supply, your independence, your confidence, your boundaries, becomes a threat she must neutralize. And the tragedy is that she cannot differentiate love from validation. To her, they are the same thing. She experiences affection only when it is directed toward her image, not her essence. You are loving the mask, and she is addicted to your reaction to it. Once you recognize this cycle, the illusion breaks, and in that moment, you reclaim the power to walk away from a dynamic that was never built to nourish you. One of the most revealing aspects of a narcissistic woman's behavior is her reliance on psychological manipulation to maintain dominance. She doesn't simply communicate, she calibrates. She doesn't merely react. She strategizes every emotional shift, whether it's warmth, withdrawal, criticism, or indifference, is part of a larger system designed to keep you disoriented enough to comply. And what makes this so effective is that most of it happens subtly, beneath the threshold of conscious detection. She engages your emotions before you have the chance to engage your reasoning. Manipulation often begins with selective reinforcement. When you behave in a way that aligns with her desires, she rewards you with affection, attention, or praise. When you express independence or challenge her narrative, she withholds emotional warmth, using silence or disappointment as a form of punishment. This intermittent reinforcement creates a psychological loop that is incredibly difficult to step out of. You begin to anticipate her reactions, adjust yourself to avoid conflict, and gradually abandon parts of your own identity to keep the peace. And in doing so, you unknowingly give her exactly what she wants, control disguised as harmony. Another common tactic is the distortion of your emotional reality. She may insist that events did not happen the way you remember, that your feelings are exaggerated, or that your concerns are irrational. This isn't confusion, it's intentional destabilization. Jung warned of individuals who manipulate the symbolic world of others, reshaping it to serve their own fragmented inner narratives. The narcissistic woman does precisely this. By eroding your trust in your own perceptions, she increases your reliance on hers. You cease to trust your intuition, and you begin trusting her interpretation of events, even when those interpretations contradict your lived experience. And then there is the emotional push and pull, the hot and cold dynamic that keeps you trapped in a constant state of emotional negotiation. One moment she pulls you close, the next she pushes you away, not because she is conflicted, but because the oscillation itself gives her power. An unpredictable partner forces you into a state of vigilance. You focus more on their emotional temperature than your own internal compass. And that is exactly where she wants you, externally focused, internally unanchored. The essence of this pattern is simple. She manipulates not because she is strong, but because she fears losing control. And once you see manipulation for what it is, not love, not passion, not complexity, but fear masquerading as dominance, you can walk away from the illusion with clarity and strength. One of the most disorienting realizations in a relationship with a narcissistic woman is that your needs rarely, if ever, enter her psychological field. It's not that she intentionally sets out to harm you, it's that she simply does not register your inner world as real in the way she registers her own. Her emotions take precedence. Her desires take precedence. Her priorities, even the most trivial ones, are treated as non-negotiable. Meanwhile, your emotional landscape becomes background noise, present but irrelevant. This imbalance is not accidental, it is structural. Narcissism creates an internal hierarchy in which the self is elevated to the center of the psychological universe, and everyone else becomes an orbiting satellite. You can offer support, attention, admiration, resources, but reciprocity is rarely part of the equation. She is not looking for mutual exchange, she is looking for emotional service. And the more you provide, the more invisible your own needs become. You may notice this in small interactions at first. When you voice a concern, it is quickly redirected back to how it affects her. When you express a boundary, it is treated as an inconvenience rather than a human necessity. When you ask for emotional presence, she responds with defensiveness rather than curiosity. This is not misunderstanding. It is self-absorption so deep that your needs cannot penetrate it. From a Jungian perspective, she is trapped in what could be called an inflated ego state. This is not confidence, it is psychic compensation. Her internal fragility forces her to construct an external posture of superiority, and maintaining that posture becomes a full-time psychological project. In that state, empathy is not just difficult, it is disruptive. Empathy would require her to acknowledge your humanity, which would in turn challenge the inflated self-image she depends on. So she avoids it. Not consciously, but instinctually, the result is a relationship that feels profoundly one-sided. You give, and she receives. You bend, and she expects more. You sacrifice, and she does not even notice the cost. Over time, you begin to feel spiritually starved, as if the relationship feeds her but depletes you. And that is precisely what happens when one person's needs are treated as the only ones that matter. The moment you understand this truth, you stop waiting for reciprocity that will never come, and you begin reclaiming the emotional space that was always meant to be yours. One of the most painful truths to confront is that a narcissistic woman is rarely attracted to who you are as a person. She is attracted to what you provide, and what you provide is rarely tangible. It is psychological, symbolic, even existential. She gravitates toward the qualities in you that elevate her: your status, your stability, your kindness, your emotional intelligence, your willingness to give without keeping score. In her world, these qualities are not signs of your character. They are resources to be harvested. This is why the beginning of the relationship often feels so intoxicating. She spots your strengths and mirrors them back to you, creating the illusion of compatibility. But beneath the surface, she is evaluating your usefulness. Can you make her feel admired? Can you reinforce her self-image? Can you soothe her insecurities? Can you serve as a steady source of emotional supply? These are the questions she is answering, not who are you, but what can you do for me? And because you are human, because you have empathy, you interpret her interest as connection, but she interprets it as acquisition. She is drawn to the benefits of your presence, not the essence of your being. Jung often spoke of projection, the way individuals cast their unintegrated parts onto others. The narcissistic woman projects an image of the ideal partner onto you, not because she sees you clearly, but because she needs someone to carry the parts of herself she cannot face. You become a symbolic figure, a psychological function, rather than a genuine partner. This explains why the relationship feels increasingly hollow over time. You show up with emotion, she shows up with expectation. You reveal your vulnerabilities, she reveals her demands. You try to deepen the connection, she redirects the focus back to what she needs, what she wants, what she believes she deserves. The asymmetry grows, not because you are lacking, but because she was never seeking you. She was seeking the advantages associated with you. Eventually you start to feel unseen, not just misunderstood, but fundamentally unrecognized. It is a strange kind of loneliness to be physically present in someone's life while emotionally erased. But this is the inevitable outcome when you are valued for your utility rather than your humanity. Once you grasp this distinction between being loved for who you are and being used for what you offer, you stop trying to earn what was never meant for you, and you begin reclaiming your worth. What many people misunderstand is that love, in its truest form, requires vulnerability. It requires openness, reciprocity, and an inner willingness to be shaped and softened by another human being. But for a narcissistic woman, vulnerability is not a bridge, it is a threat. The very experiences that deepen a healthy relationship are the same experiences that destabilize her psychological structure. So instead of seeking connection, she seeks control. Control allows her to maintain the illusion of superiority. Connection would force her to confront the fragile self she hides beneath that illusion. You can see this fear of vulnerability in the way she reacts to genuine intimacy. When you invite her into deeper emotional territory, honesty, accountability, shared responsibility, she pulls away, becomes defensive, or redirects the conversation entirely. These reactions aren't random. They reveal the fault lines in her inner world. True intimacy requires her to acknowledge limitations, insecurities, and emotional truths she has spent her life avoiding. To her, that level of exposure feels like psychological annihilation. So she gravitates toward control, because control allows her to avoid the discomfort of emotional truth. This is why relationships with narcissistic women often feel like walking through a maze rather than building a partnership. The closer you move toward authenticity, the more resistance you meet. She prefers dynamics where she can remain superior, where she dictates the emotional climate, where she is the judge rather than the participant. Her dominance becomes a shield, a psychic defense mechanism that protects her from confronting what Jung might describe as the unintegrated shadow. She projects strength because she cannot tolerate her own vulnerability, and yet, despite the facade, she remains deeply dependent on others for emotional validation. It's a paradox. She needs people, but she cannot connect with them. She seeks admiration, yet fears genuine closeness. She desires devotion, but recoils from emotional equality. Love, in its pure form, dissolves the ego. Control fortifies it. And she cannot afford dissolution. Once you recognize this dynamic, you stop trying to extract love from a structure that cannot give it. You understand that her resistance to intimacy is not a reflection of your worth, but a reflection of her wounds. And in that understanding, you regain the clarity to choose connection over confusion, truth over illusion, and freedom over control. Remember this: the love you seek requires openness, and openness cannot exist where fear governs the heart.